things will go crazy for a second. There we go. All right.
Yeah.
So, David, go ahead.
Yeah. So I started integrating what I learned in one of the videos that I watched about oxygenating the body system, um, and that, and also I really um, loved a couple of things that I've heard you say in a few of your videos that I've started also integrating in my practice. And that's when I've heard you say, like, being a winner, or being a lion. And I've been trying to integrate that sort of um, joy and excitement, and that feel good, kind of energy into my self talk while I'm meditating, and also while I'm off the cushion and just walking around. I'm really trying to just keep that sort of uh, that vibe going. And
Your audio is not so good now. Maybe you need to move a little closer to the microphone.
okay.
Yes, that's much better.
Okay, so I'm a little bit closer then. Let me. All right.
All right.
Yeah, so my webcam isn't a portable thing. It's built into the computer, and it's at a very awkward angle in the bottom left-hand corner. So that's why if I'm staring at the screen, it looks like I'm staring off like.
All right. So, it's really good to hear that people are gaining value just by watching the videos. That's kind of the intention for putting them on YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
as kind of fixating things. Because normally what I do is just say the same Dhamma over and over and over and over again to the students, and by recording it, that is getting also, because there's various aspects and various things to look at. I think that over the course of time, um, that we've gotten actually the complete Dhamma. Maybe not to complete in all of the details with every sutta, but certainly all of the topics that are important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, do you have any particular questions?
Yes, I do. The first one that's coming to mind is so I've been trying to do that those short deep breaths, like the ones when you're out of breath,
Oh,
like
you tried that. Okay, good.
and so what I've been noticing when I do that, and it doesn't happen every time, but sometimes I will start to feel the vibrancy that you described, and I'll feel it mostly in my hands and occasionally.
Your audio has gone out again.
Uh, all right, how is it now? Maybe I
It's
can just.
better. It's
Okay,
better.
so I'll just speak like this when I'm talking. Um, yeah. So doing those short breaths, I'll feel that energetic vibrancy in my hands and in my mouth area, and it will last for about 10 seconds, 15 seconds.
Your audio has gone out again, so I don't think that it has to do with how close you are.
Okay. All right.
It
Then.
it it might be that the editing software for the audio
Mhm.
has to not have the uh, let us say, what little ambient sound the speakers are making. That you might, next time you call, have a set of headphones so that
Yeah, here, let
get
me.
better audio.
I actually do have headphones. I don't think they have a mic built into. Okay. Is this at all better?
Well, it seems that it starts to drop out after you've been talking.
Okay.
So when you start up talking, it's fine. Let's see if it goes bad again. I'll let you know.
All right. So I'll speak 2 sentences at a time.
Okay.
So what did you hear?
Well, your first question was,
Oh, so I was describing the short breaths and the vibrancy in the hands and mouth. And so my question is there anything extra that I need to do, or is it just a matter of consistency and over time I can expect those sensations to increase, or should I be changing my attention onto those sensations, or should I just continue with the breath, or
they will change. That it First off, it doesn't have anything to do with the intensity of those sensations. When I teach the students about that kind of breathing,
mm-hmm,
it's to get them to alert them about how important the breathing is, because you can see by doing that that it really does energize the body, so that you can
mm-hmm,
feel the tingling. You can feel that you're actually woken up. That's the important point. When I ask the students about it, the first thing they mention is the tingling of the body.
mm-hmm,
But then when we look at it, it's okay. Also, the mind is really sharp now.
mm-hmm,
Okay. So looking for that quality of having a very sharp mind, because you're oxygenating the body.
mm-hmm,
Okay, so let's pay more attention on the fact that we've got a sharp mind, and that it's not a matter of how sharp can I make it, because that's the normal way of the Western thought, is to try to grab hold of one thing and make it perfect. And when it's
right.
perfect, then I'll be satisfied.
Yes, yes, that is a major struggle of mine.
Okay, so if people are breathing at about a 30% level, then they need to be breathing at a 50% level.
Mm-hmm,
Then showing them that by having them breathe at an 80% level is a really good thing to do. And here you go, wanting to make it 100% level.
yeah.
All right, so that's going to be something that you can begin to look for. Is that we're looking, in fact, for a mental state of satisfaction
Mm-hmm,
as an important point. And part of the satisfaction is going to be that mind that's sharp and alert and um, ready to do the work, ready to have it applied, and so that it can sustain.
mm-hmm.
And that if you get that sharp mind and you're still not satisfied with it, then you're missing the point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's a really excellent first question to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is it's an inappropriate question.
Yeah,
Or is
that
looking at things from the wrong way or the wrong angle.
I see. Yeah. I feel like that's an issue with my practice is that I feel like everything needs to be perfect in order to get the results that I want. Um,
Ah, okay. Well, there goes that chore thing again.
right. Yeah.
Well,
So,
have you ever felt like that you've got to get something perfect before you can get any joy or satisfaction out of it in any other thing, or is this brand new for your
no, I'd say
city?
it's a common thing. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the important thing to recognize then, that all of the bad habits that you have had in your life are not necessarily all the bad habits, but the ones that really interfere with your life are the very habits that you bring into meditation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm. And so we have to start noticing that so that we can start practicing correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And that in one of the ways of doing it, or to talk about it, is that that's a mind that is a hindrance. And
Mm-hmm.
what we have to do is get the mind free from hindrance,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
wanting it to be better or wanting it to be perfect, or any of those kind of thoughts are thoughts of wanting something that you don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're actually creating suffering
Yeah.
when you've already got the mind sharp, but you're not satisfied with it. Then that makes it a hindrance for you to get into this state of satisfaction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is what we mean by hindrances, and they're really, really subtle.
Mm-hmm.
Wanting something you don't have, or having to put up with something that you don't want to put up with, like leg pain or any of that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
also a hindrance.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to learn to work with the hindrances, but generally the best way to work with hindrances is simply by, if you can think of it like this, forget about it
Okay.
or just drop it
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or let go.
Mm-hmm.
But another way of looking at it is shove it out.
Mm-hmm.
Take out the trash. This is a way of thinking then, but the way of shoving it out is imagine that your mind is only one small shelf,
One
and
small.
that shelf
Okay.
or a small area, let's say the top of a table or something, a small
Right,
table,
right, right, right. Gotcha.
and it has got room for only one thing at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a pile of crap on the table, the easiest way to get the table free from that pile of crap is by taking what you want to have, something wholesome, good, and valuable, and take that and move it in,
Mm-hmm.
thereby having that shove out that
Mm-hmm.
which you didn't want on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is an analogy then of actually how the mind works. Now, we can get really sophisticated and talk about that the mind is more like a mainframe than
Mm-hmm.
it is a laptop, in
Mm-hmm.
the sense that the I/O is going in both directions at the same time, and a whole lot more processing is. But basically, even in the really, really big mainframe computers, they still do one instruction at a time.
Mm-hmm.
You have to load the register before you can add the new number in. You can't just add the number in because you don't know what used to be in the register. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so the addition machine. Okay, so in that regard, normally we think one thought at a time, but that we can change thoughts very quickly.
Yes.
and that they go one after another in succession. And the succession is generally referred to or we've referred to it in Fortean terms of free association,
Mm-hmm.
where basically the cow or the horse is out to pasture and it just munches around and it just goes all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
But also it can get stuck in a circle, so that we get it's possible to actually sit and think about and write and rewrite the same email over and over and over again until you think you've got it perfect. And then when you sit down to write the email, then you're now trying to remember what you thought up before.
Right.
The easier and better way to do it is don't think about the email until you're ready to write it. And then when you do, be satisfied with what you did, hit the send key, and then go back into a state of massive satisfaction. And I bet you know what I'm talking about. Not just emails, but we live our whole lives like that. That we spend a whole lot of time preparing for it, and then when we do it, it's nothing like what we prepared for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the nature of plans. Another way of saying it is nobody knows the future. Really, we don't. That's really, really an interesting quality that the Buddha teaches. Is nobody knows what the future is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And the past is gone. It's dead.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, so many of us spend so much time thinking about something that did happen already, and now I've got to write an email in answer to it. You don't even have to write the email. It's not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
But we do it because it's perhaps a chore.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so we do a lot of stuff out of the need to have them done. But when we do a very close inspection, we recognize that in the mind, we've probably done it 4 or 5 or a dozen or 1,000 times in the mind before we actually get her done in reality.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That time that we spent mentally thinking about something could be better spent. Like in joy, in happiness, in telling ourselves jokes.
Yeah, sure.
And
Yeah.
in marveling at what a beautiful day today is with all the rain.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the really cool breeze that the rain brings. So basically what we're talking about is these hindrances are actually hindrances to us being in the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
In a very joyful, satisfying way.
Mm-hmm.
And so going back to that kind of breathing is to help the student stimulate themselves and know that they're being stimulated, but that the long, deep breath
Mm-hmm.
is better as one to maintain, because most people can't maintain that short breath beyond about a minute. In fact, if I don't keep encouraging the students on the internet, they'll quit doing it. I have to keep saying, come on, keep going, let's do it, because it's really difficult to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
if it is difficult to do, then doesn't that scream in the face of getting satisfied?
Sure. Yeah.
So this short breath is actually a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not a vehicle to ride around in.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
That really what we want to do is get the mind sharp and focused by doing a longer but a more complete breath.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how much deep it is, we can
Mm-hmm.
talk about it also like this: that if you had a breath that was right up there at 100%, you could
Mm-hmm.
still somehow take a little bit more air in.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like topping up the truck or topping up the car and then bouncing the back fender to get any
Mm-hmm.
air bubbles out, so you can put just another half quart of gas in it.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of work. That's a lot of suffering.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Right? We don't need to do that, but we do need to take in a full, deep breath that is in fact satisfying,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can experience the abdomen falling down as the diaphragm muscles are pushing downward. Also, the chest will inflate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that will get a good feel of breathing. See, the short breath isn't even a long, deep breath in the sense that it gets a lot of oxygen in and out, but it's only using about a third of the lungs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when a dog pants, it's only using about 10% of the lungs.
Mm-hmm.
That job, the panting, is in fact to cool. That's how the dogs cool off. But the running breath then is designed solely for getting the oxygen in.
Mm-hmm.
What we're looking for is a long, deep, satisfying breath that also gets a lot of oxygen in, but it also at the same time pushes a lot of old crap out. That what comes out of the lungs is not just carbon dioxide, but there's a whole lot of breakdown of amino acids. They get really, really small so that the basilica of the lungs can pick that stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it even stays in the bloodstream for a while and eventually dissolves so that it can be, or that it gets trapped in the liver and in the kidneys for use next time. And so
Mm-hmm.
when the adrenal gland needs some adrenaline, it's going to go get the constituent parts of that adrenaline out of the kidney.
Mm-hmm.
And then the adrenaline, when it's doing its job, it gets broken apart. Part of its job is not a catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a permanent thing. That adrenaline actually is, in a way, is not designed so much of making the body work, but that it carries the junk out.
Mm-hmm.
But having those chemicals in the body is not necessarily a good idea. We experience it in the form of anxiety as opposed to pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
So getting the body to where we're breathing well so that we get stuff out and get stuff in. In fact, one of the ways of looking at what kind of out breath should we have, it
Mm-hmm.
would be a sigh.
Mm-hmm.
Let me demonstrate it.
Like a sigh through the nose.
It doesn't matter. The out
Oh,
breath doesn't
okay.
matter. The in breath is better to take it in through the nostrils because that filters and warms the air, but on the out breath, it doesn't matter so much.
Okay.
But what does matter is that it's a release. In fact, you can think of it as with the mouth. Breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. But but basically, you can recognize that you're breathing out through the mouth, but you're probably breathing out a lot with the nose also.
Okay. So
Just
so so exaggerated like that.
just to get started.
Okay.
After that, it comes more relaxed.
Okay.
But if you take your mind away from it, if the mind goes into hindrance, then it will go back into shallow breathing.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And you could think of the shallow breathing then as like when one reads a book. If we're very curious and interested in really getting the stuff out of the book, then each sentence we know that. And with the end of the paragraph and starting this paragraph, we know what the foundation was from the previous paragraph. But we
Mm-hmm.
don't read like that. How do we read? We read something, we get an idea about it, we think about it, and the eyes keep moving down the page while the mind is like that. Well, that's
Mm-hmm.
how we normally breathe, also.
Mm-hmm.
So we're actually going to pay enough attention to the breathing, and just enough means to know that it's a long in breath and a long out breath. That's all we need to know,
Mm-hmm.
which means that now we have plenty of time to go do a whole lot of other skill developments, like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
joy,
Mm-hmm.
like keeping the mind free from hindrance. And this quality of the breathing then has then the quality of making the mind sharp. That many students will say, oh, I get dull when in meditation. And they don't connect, that they don't get dull while they're breathing deep. They get dull when they forget to watch the breath. The mind goes into hindrance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then it gets dull because there's not enough oxygen there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is an important quality, but that deep, fast breathing that would be called the breath that you do when you're out of breath, and the body or
Right.
the reptilian brain is demanding air, air. I got to get air.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of quality, then breathing that way really does oxygenate the body. That's
Mm-hmm.
its primary tool, is to get oxygen in. This
Mm-hmm.
longer deep breathing has that quality, but it also has the quality of cleaning.
Mm-hmm. So on a similar topic then, as far as posture is concerned, because sometimes I notice that I start to slump and then I, you know, kind of get obsessive over whether or not that's okay or whether or not I always need to maintain a straight spine, you
Neither
know.
one.
Okay.
Neither one of those.
All righty.
All right. The first one is there's a part of you that's saying that it might affect the breathing if you're slouching, and it may also cause pain in the body.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other thing that you said was right out of the parent, right out of the one who gave you a chore to do, and
Mm-hmm.
says, no, you've got to sit like this, okay?
Right, right.
And
Mm-hmm.
so you make two mistakes in a row with that. A better way to think of it is that as you recognize the body, you can, in
Yeah.
fact, in an in-breath, you can think about straightening the body just a tiny little bit, just effortless.
Okay.
This reminds me, in fact, about in Zen, who gets, you know the quality of the Zen stick, that
Yes.
it makes a lot of noise, but it doesn't hurt.
Oh, I didn't know that. I always assumed it hurt a lot.
No, it doesn't hurt at all. What it is it's a piece of bamboo that has a slit.
Oh, okay.
About 2/3 of the way down the stick, they'll drill a hole. And
Uh-huh.
then they'll take it with a knife and split it down to that hole.
Uh-huh.
And then they'll do a bit of shaving off
Uh-huh.
on the inside of that, so that it creates just a tiny little distance, so that when you hit that stick, those two things come together,
Right.
compress the air that's in that bamboo, and makes
Right.
a loud noise.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So, in fact, you could also think of it as a spring. If you got hit with let us say that you got hit with a certain force by a fist that was operated by a machine that was solid steel and it hits you,
Mm-hmm.
versus hitting that same fist hitting you, but now spring loaded.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that when it hit you, the spring got some of the absorption of the shock as well as your face. Okay, so that's the Zen stick. Now,
Mm-hmm.
who
Mm-hmm.
gets hit? Who
Person
gets hit?
slouching, the sloucher,
Maybe,
or the person
maybe.
asleep.
Yes, for sure. Basically, you could also say if someone is deeply absorbed in jhana, they'll also get hit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who does not get hit is the one who's paying attention to what's happening, and he knows that the Zen master is behind him or coming
Mm-hmm.
up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what does he do when the Zen master comes up behind him and he knows it? What does he do?
Probably straighten up a little bit.
Just a little bit. And the Zen master sees that and walks right on.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Okay. So now that you understand that secret, you can say, okay, well, be your own Zen master and set up just a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but don't have a Zen master that's doing this to you. That's a
Mm-hmm.
different, and we'll talk about that later. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So everything has to do then about becoming friendly with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
to allow yourself to be enjoyable. Whatever posture that you're in, you're looking for one thing, and that is satisfaction with that posture.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And that one of the reasons for sitting up straight is that, especially if you do it correctly, is that then you can sit longer without pain. The sloucher is the one who begins to have a lot of pain. It's like this. Watch my hand. If gravity is coming down and I'm sitting like that, then it doesn't take a lot of effort to sit. All it has to do is just relax, and there it is. However, if the fingers start to slouch, or the body starts to slouch, now gravity is pulling down, and you've got to actually use back muscles to hold the body up. So that's it. That's the reason to sit up straight. But the point is because it's comfortable. Not because some religious dude said that you should sit like that.
Sure. Yeah, I think, what happens to me is I'll straighten up a bit, and then maybe sometimes it'll feel like maybe I lose my concentration, or like it's like starting over again, or
that is sati. That's exactly the whole point of this. Goenka said it, never mind, start again. What is the never mind? Recognize that the mind has wandered away, or that something happened, or some hindrance is coming in, and we start again. That starting again, over and over and over again, we begin to develop the skills of the Eightfold Noble Path. That right noble view is a skill, and it will increase as we become able to see things. Let us say it like this: when we begin to see things that are normally seen as diverse and complex, we see that same system as more simple and more unified, because we're taking a different view of it. We can see all the constituent components, but we see how they fit together rather than fighting with each other. So this is one's right view, but also one's right sati, to remember, is that skill that we have been talking about, and we find it everywhere. It's anapanasati, satipatthana. Sati is one of the members of the Eightfold Noble Path. It's the first item of the Sambhojana. It's one of the factors of the basis of power. It's just everywhere. And not only that, but that's the number one primary thing that makes the teaching of the Buddha different in practice from everything else. As one of the constituent components that makes the teaching of the Buddha absolutely unique. And that is to remember, to keep coming back and doing it over and over and over and over again. Develop a new habit. Remember, focus, remember. But here the focus does not mean concentration. It means to remember and come back and do it again and again and again and again. Why? Because the normal state of the mind is that it's free associating. That it just rambles all over the place. The question will be, like a dog. The dog can be all over the yard. The question is, will the dog come when I call it? If the dog will come when I call it, that's all I need from the dog. That's the only training I need to give the dog, is if he will come to me when I call him. Especially hard to do is to get the dog to come when some visitor or the postman comes onto the property. Getting the dog to shut up and come when he's called is hard for him. That's the difficulty. Well, the same thing is true with the human mind. Will it come when you call it? Or does it stay out in the pasture barking or whatever? Which means, does it stay in a state of hindrance? Go ahead.
Yeah, my sits tend to be that I can go the full hour without losing track of the breath, but there will always be mental chatter, going on, and I'd say that the breath is always somewhat in mind, though it's not always the largest focus And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at in my sits most of the time.
Okay, what you're talking about, it using the term mental chatter,
Mm-hmm.
others will call it junk thought.
Yes.
Okay,
I
and that,
definitely don't want it there.
well, basically what we need to do then while we're watching the breath is to begin to watch the thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
That we're going to have wholesome thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And not allow the junk thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
That's really much of the practice. That's the training of the mind so that it will, first off, it'll come. Now, the other part is, do you remember to call the dog? The dog can be out doing something and we're doing something else and we forget all about the dog. And now somebody comes on the property and the dog is out there barking, but I'm not paying any attention. So that's the point of that. In fact, having the dog come back is more like right effort.
Mm-hmm.
But remembering to call the dog, that's sati.
Mm-hmm.
To remember to call those thoughts back.
Mm-hmm.
To not let those thoughts wander away. Now, in fact, a lot of people will say, "Oh, I can watch the breath, but those thoughts are in the background."
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we're underway, but there's still hindrances because they are hindering the student from being in a state of satisfaction. This is only one of the components.
Mm-hmm.
And that we need to gather up all of the 5 constituent components.
Mm-hmm.
And so the quality of being able to apply the mind to something and keep it focused and sustained on that is a really important quality.
Mm-hmm.
Is applied and sustained thought. Can we keep sustaining the kind of thoughts that we want to have, or are we going to let the mind have its freedom?
Mm-hmm. So
Okay.
as far as delineating junk thoughts from wholesome thoughts, um, I'm assuming wholesome thoughts include good job, you can do it, keep going, you're wonderful, and junk thoughts are
I'm not
just
sure about that one. Let us say, oh, what a wonderful moment this is.
Okay, all right. I'll remove the So what about the whole "you're a winner"? Is that more just an attitude,
Well,
or is that
no, it's a feeling of being a winner, not a
okay?
me that's the winner. It's the feeling
Uh-huh.
of being successful.
All righty.
It is actually a feeling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's an emotion. It's an
Mm-hmm.
experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it is just as powerful and healing as anger is powerful and destructive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
That it's curative. And that feeling then is going to grow and be more available as we're able to control the mind through having the applied and sustained thought to keep doing this and not letting the mind wander off and do that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so part then of one's right view is to be able to choose what's worthy of my attention, or not
Mm-hmm.
my attention, but what's worthy of um, being um, aware of or focused on, or in this regard, what's worthy of being in the mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so that's the question. What is it? So I can give you an idea, but you're going to have to figure out what those things are each moment.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
in fact, that's how right view will grow as you see each thought and then determine, is that a wholesome thought or not?
Mm-hmm.
By doing so, you're actually now beginning to do the first noble truth of this is suffering or
Mm-hmm.
it's not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at it. Is that thought unwholesome? Is that thought a junk thought? Is that thought a hindrance? Is that thought unworthy of being on my table called the mind?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
All right. So a list of those would be anything that's past, anything that's future, anything that has to do with the task that needs to be done.
I think I got a lot of those.
Both on the outside and the inside,
Mm-hmm.
wanting things we don't have, putting up with things that that are difficult to endure.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the definitions, by the way, of a Nietzsche. Is not that everything is temporary, but it is difficult to maintain. That's an important quality of things being in a state of temporariness, is that it's difficult to maintain them.
Mm-hmm.
Look how much attention that people have to pay to their automobiles to keep them maintained,
Mm-hmm.
because the natural tendency of the automobile is to go from brand new spiff and span, ready to roll, into being an old clunker.
Yeah, sure.
That is natural tendency. The mind is like that too, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and and so we have to understand that part of the hindrance of the mind is having to endure things that are dissatisfying. And so that basically covers the bases. Another one would be uh, oh, drowsiness or
Mm-hmm.
dullness,
Mm-hmm.
which is because we're not getting enough breath. And so
Mm-hmm.
we've already, by working with the breath, gotten the mind fit and ready to work, so that we can apply and sustain the mind to what we want to do, and that is to guard the door for every thought that comes in
Mm-hmm.
as to whether this is a wholesome thought having or not.
Mm-hmm.
So that we begin then to manage it so that unwholesome thoughts are not allowed in, and we can keep, in fact, wholesome thoughts in.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see that we can do that for a short time, and then somehow some junk thought will come in.
Mm-hmm.
But when we have wholesome thoughts, then we can say, okay, wholesome thoughts would be about what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's happening right now is the touch of the cloth of your shirt. Another one is the breathing in and out. Another one is that you can feel the breath of the out breath on your hand. You can
Mm-hmm.
feel the stroke of the beard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can experience the nodding up and down of the head. All of this stuff that we normally don't pay any attention to,
Mm-hmm.
we now are beginning to pay attention to it, to
Mm-hmm.
the point that, my, this is a wonderful moment. Look at all of the stuff that's happening. Everything is a Nietzsche at high speed.
Mm-hmm. So,
And we're not paying attention to what's going on because we're hindered.
so what you were describing there to me didn't really seem like thoughts. I would just describe those as, sensations. Um, but
Yes, but if you're paying attention to them, that's where your thought machine is.
okay,
Right here in the here now.
okay. So any sensation that's in the present is cool. Okay,
Okay. Well, I'm just giving you examples of things that are happening in this present moment,
right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as opposed to things that are in the past, or
Mm-hmm.
jobs that need to be done, or plans that need to be made.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Probably the most interesting kind of that would be that the student says, I was sitting and I was doing a really good job of meditation, and the next instant I realized that I was standing in front of the refrigerator with the door open.
and never experienced that.
Well, what was going on is that all the thoughts about going to the refrigerator were there, but there was no sati.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then sati came and he said, "Wait a minute, what have I been doing?"
Ah, I gotcha. Yeah.
So, this is one of the things that we start to develop is sati. Let's get that remembrance going. Keep
Mm-hmm.
remembering and remembering, knowing that the mind is going to wander away. So even though those thoughts are in the background
Mm-hmm.
and that you're having the breath in the foreground, there are still hindrances and they still need to be managed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that in fact in the foreground it's not just the breath, but it's everything that's happening. And when one of those thoughts come up, it's really not in the background. It's that we're doing this and then that will happen, and we're doing this and then that will happen again, and then we're doing this and that will happen, and soon we've got a pattern of every time I'm doing this, it gets interrupted, and it gets interrupted, and it gets interrupted. And so what we begin to recognize is we're going to start watching this interruption as well as watching what we were originally being distracted from. We're going to watch both the distraction and what our intention was.
Mm-hmm.
And so these distractions then are going to be wholesome distractions, not
Mm-hmm.
unwholesome distractions. An
Mm-hmm.
example of this is that, oh, this is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Those would be the kind of thoughts. Or, wow, this has been going on for quite a while now, and I'm really satisfied with it. All right.
Okay.
So these are the kind of thoughts that we want to have that's going to lead us into that state of feeling like we're successful at this,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as opposed to being in a state of, I want more. This is not good enough. Am
Mm-hmm.
I breathing right?
Mm-hmm.
That's, so get ourselves into a state of satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that by being in the present moment, and we're doing it also in relationship to the Four Noble Truths. We begin to pay attention. How's the sati?
Mm-hmm.
How's the investigation? How is the effort? What kind of effort does it take? Am I actually developing, or another way of saying it is um, that attitude of being a winner, that attitude of can do, is that being looked at and developed? That's how we do it. We start literally, in a way, paying attention to that. I've looked at vocabulary so often and that I wind up rejecting every term, and then I'm left with no term to use. Okay, paying attention. That's a problematic phrase.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So I want to throw that one out. Then I say, okay, focus. No, focus has got also. It's a problematic word. So I don't have any really good words to use for what we're talking about. So we'll have to use the kind of words that are in the English language, which would be then to start noting or to paying attention to what the mind is doing besides just watching the breath, when it's watching the breath. But then when you recognize it is not watching the breath, in fact, the disruptions have overcome now the watching of the breath, because that's exactly how it happens is that we're watching the breath and interruption, we're watching the breath and interruption, we're watching the breath 2 little moments of interruption, then we're
Mm-hmm.
watching the breath and 3 moments of interruption, then we're watching the breath, and then now we're lost.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Interruption, interruption, interruption.
Mm-hmm.
So beginning to watch these interruptions
Mm-hmm.
so that you can figure out, are they wholesome or not?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What kind of thoughts are you going to allow yourself while you're watching the breath?
Mm-hmm. All right.
One would be, aha, I see you, when that thought comes.
Okay.
When that junk thought comes, you can say, I can see that. Because
Mm-hmm.
now that's a new thought, but
Mm-hmm.
that's associated with wholesomeness.
Okay. Great. Mm-hmm.
And so noticing what's going on in the mind, and that's different than noticing. Um, the distinction would be like the distinction between a witness. There's two kinds of witness: the witness that saw the accident, and then the story that the witness tells on the witness stand in court.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Our kind of witness that we're going to work with is the one who saw the accident, one accident after another.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to spend much time in court telling ourselves stories,
Mm-hmm.
because when we're telling ourselves stories, that's when the mind really has lost it and is not watching anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So um, when people do the Mahasi noting,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes they'll get lost into telling themselves stories about what just happened rather than looking at what's happening now.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to start focusing on what's happening now, including the junk thoughts that are coming up, so that we can say, no, that's not the junk, that's not the kind of thought that we want in. We want thoughts that are associated with what's happening right now,
Mm-hmm.
including the practice itself. So
Mm-hmm.
we think about anapanasati. We think about the various stages of anapanasati. We think about the Eightfold Noble Path in how am I developing these as skills?
Mm-hmm.
Or how are these skills being developed if you want to take the I out of it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so this is a kind of a new way of practicing,
Mm-hmm.
because the normal way of practicing is saying, oh, well, now I'm watching the breath, I'm doing it all correct. Oh, no, now that you've got anapanasati, that's almost just like a vehicle. Now we're going to start populating that vehicle with things that are worthwhile,
Mm-hmm.
as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to just spending whatever junk wants to climb on.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. So I think I'm gonna go, but yeah, just as a little recap, what I'm taking away is number one, be gentler and looser with the perfectionistic tendencies, with the posture and the breathing, and whether or not it's perfect or whatever. And then to be more selective about what sorts of thoughts are occurring, and to be more encouraging of the wholesome thoughts, and shooing away the unwholesome ones. Um,
Okay, right.
is that
There is a thing called choiceless awareness. That's not what we're practicing.
right? Mm-hmm.
One of the ways of looking at it is, imagine that you're standing in the road and a big truck is bearing right down on you, and you see it coming, but you just
Mm-hmm.
let it hit you.
Yeah.
What's the difference then if it hits you, whether you see it coming or not?
Right. Yeah. No,
All
I
right.
I, I definitely want to be satisfied. So.
Okay. So when the Mack truck comes and we see it coming, we should step out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes those junk thoughts are like Mack trucks, they'll hit us.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, and so we watch it coming, and we can step out of the way
Mm-hmm.
so that we can keep ourselves into a state of satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, we're working with three items now: the item of the body and the breathing, the
Mm-hmm.
item of the mind and the contents of the mind,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're working with this state of satisfaction on the emotional level.
Mm-hmm.
And we begin to watch the emotions also, knowing that everything is temporary. And
Mm-hmm.
now we've got more or less the entire Satipatthana working.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we'll look forward to you next time. When are you calling again?
I don't know, maybe tomorrow, if that's okay, or the next day.
Yeah, every couple of days for a while, settling into about once a week, maybe do.
Okay, all right. So I'll call you in a few days then.
Okay, excellent. Well, we'll see you, David.
All righty,
Have
thank you.
fun.
All right, thank you so much.
We're giving you a few new toys to play with.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you. I appreciate it. Have a good
All
one.
right.
Bye-bye.